He was alone again, always alone, behind that door, in a silence so thick it felt alive. I stood in the hallway, heart pounding like it had something to say I didn't want to hear. The light under his door flickered like a secret trying to escape. And me? I stood there barefoot, caught between the person I used to be and the one I didn't recognize anymore. I hadn't planned for any of this. I didn't want to feel what I felt. But when the silence in your life becomes deafening, even the faintest sound can feel like a scream. He wasn't making noise in there. No music, no laughter, just presence. A quiet presence that started to echo in the hollowness of my own life. The kind of quiet that doesn't comfort. It confronts. And suddenly, I wasn't standing outside his door. I was standing at the edge of myself. There was a time this house felt like home. There was warmth, laughter, the kind of comfort that made you believe in forever. But life wore that down, or maybe we wore each other down. My husband had become a stranger in plain sight, present in body, absent in every other way. We used to touch without thinking. Now we pass like shadows. Meals are shared with phones, not conversation. Nights spent inches apart, but miles away. You tell yourself it's a phase, that it'll pass. But the truth is, some things don't pass. They just quietly rot. When Jake moved in, I didn't think much of it. Mark said it would help him save money, that it was the right thing to do. He didn't ask if I was okay with it, and I didn't object. I didn't have it in me to care anymore. But the moment Jake stepped through that door, the air in the house shifted. Not in a loud or obvious way, just different. Like the universe inhaled and forgot to let go. He didn't speak much, kept to himself, always polite, always guarded. His eyes avoided mine, but his presence was heavy, like he was dragging something unseen behind him. I cooked for him, left little notes, offered kindness where I could, not out of obligation, but because I recognized something in him. That loneliness, that numbness. You don't forget that feeling once it lives in you. Mark barely noticed either of us. Always working, always traveling, always with that phone. I stopped waiting for his attention. But Jake, he was there. Quiet, but real. And real is powerful when you've lived in a house built on autopilot. We crossed paths in late-night kitchens and early morning silences, shared nods, brief glances, and with every passing moment, I started to feel more awake. Not because of lust, not because I wanted something reckless, but because I just wanted to be seen again, to feel like someone noticed me, even in passing, to not be invisible. It crept up slowly, the shift in how I looked at him, the way his shoulders filled out, how his voice settled into something deeper. He wasn't a boy anymore, and maybe it was me. Maybe I was the one changing. Seeing things differently because I had stopped being seen altogether. I hated that I noticed, hated that I cared. But emotions don't ask for permission. They seep in, quiet, persistent, unrelenting. Then came that night, the night I heard sounds behind his door. Nothing explicit, just enough to freeze my breath and anchor me to that hallway. I knocked without thinking. Just a light tap, a reflex maybe. And when he answered, I heard it, that barely there edge in his voice. Embarrassment, shame, and something else I didn't want to name. I walked away. But I didn't leave that moment behind. It followed me, curled up somewhere in my chest like a question I didn't want to answer. I told myself it was natural, that he was 19, figuring things out. But I couldn't shake the way he looked at me the next morning, like he saw me, like he knew something had changed. And maybe it had. Maybe something between us had started to bend, almost imperceptibly, in a direction neither of us could deny. It wasn't about acting on anything. It wasn't about scandal or seduction. It was about the human ache to be recognized, to be understood without words. That morning, everything looked the same, but I wasn't. Something had shifted, not in the world, but in me. And once that happens, there's no going back. But something had already cracked open inside me. And once it begins, there's no reversing it. It spreads quietly, like a hairline fracture running through everything you thought was solid. I sat across from Jake that morning, the sound of his spoon tapping against his bowl, steam rising from my coffee, but all I could think about was that look. Not the physical part, no, not that, but the moment our eyes met and neither of us looked away. It was quiet, but loud in its own way, and it had been so long since someone really looked at me. Not touched, not kissed, not even brushed by accident. Mark hadn't done any of that in months. Always somewhere else, either in his head or in another city. I used to try. I'd wear something new, cook something he loved, slide my hand across the sheets just to feel his skin. And when the silence got louder than any rejection, I stopped reaching. Nothing feels lonelier than trying to touch someone who doesn't even notice. But Jake noticed. Not in words, not in any obvious way, just in the way his breath would shift when I entered the room, the way his eyes would land and pause. I didn't ask for that. I didn't plan for it. But when you're starving, even the smallest thing can taste like a banquet. I started lingering a little longer in rooms he was in, passing by doors when I knew he hadn't fallen asleep yet, starting harmless conversations just to feel something warm in the silence. At night, I told myself the thin robes were because of the heat, but that was a lie. The truth was I wanted to be seen, even by him, especially by him. I moved differently, more deliberately, bent a little slower, walked a little louder, because part of me hoped he'd be listening. And it was wrong. I knew that, but right and wrong blur when you haven't felt wanted in a long time. The curiosity was slow, almost patient. A question whispered in the quiet. What if he's looking too? I lied to myself. I told myself I was being kind, watching out for him, making him feel welcome. But my thoughts betrayed me. They weren't warm or innocent. They were tangled and aching. At night, I'd lie in bed next to Mark, whose back was always turned. And I'd stare at the ceiling thinking about the light glowing under Jake's door, the way he sounded when I knocked, the flicker in his expression when we crossed paths in the kitchen. I hated myself for it. But not entirely. I'd thought I outgrew this. That marriage was supposed to quiet those old needs. I thought love would be a constant, something you could wrap around yourself like a blanket. But sometimes even the thickest blanket leaves you cold. And Jake? He didn't do anything. Not really. But he made me feel real, like I wasn't invisible. And that was enough to spark something I couldn't smother. He started looking longer, holding my gaze just a second more than he should, watching me move. At first it was nothing, but then his hand brushed mine in the hallway, grazed my waist when we reached for the same plate. That hand lingered, just slightly, but enough. We didn't talk about it, didn't need to. The silence carried the weight. Then Mark left again, off to another meeting, another trip, another reason not to be here. I asked Jake if he wanted to watch something, just a movie, just a couch, just a blanket. We sat apart at first, bowls of popcorn between us, some comedy murmuring in the background, and somewhere in that blur, Jake moved closer. He leaned into me, then rested his head in my lap, like it meant nothing, like we'd done it before. My breath caught, my fingers hesitated above him, but then I touched his hair, just gently, then his shoulder. Then, I didn't mean for my hand to drift, but it did, tracing lines it shouldn't cross. And when I realized how far I'd gone, I pulled away like I'd touched fire. I expected guilt, maybe anger. But when he sat up and looked at me, all I saw was stillness, understanding. No shame, just that quiet connection that had been building all along. I told myself it would stop, that I'd put space between us. But the next morning, I walked into the kitchen still wearing the robe I hadn't changed out of. And he was there, bare skin, cereal box in hand, not flinching, not hiding. He looked at me like nothing was out of place, like my heartbeat wasn't thundering in my chest, like I hadn't touched him the night before. He said good morning, like it was any other day, and I turned away, but his gaze didn't. After that, even the smallest moments carried weight. A glance across the table, a brush in the hallway, silence that felt electric. Neither of us said anything, but both of us felt it, thick and unavoidable. We were caught in a quiet storm of our own making, and I could have stopped it. Should have. But after so long of feeling unseen, his attention felt like sunlight, addictive and dangerous. Then the power went out. No warning, just the soft collapse of sound. No fridge, no hallway light, no hum of electricity. I lit a candle and walked barefoot toward the living room, and he was already there, like he'd been waiting. The storm outside wasn't violent. It was soft, a slow, creeping kind, rain tapping against the windows, distant thunder, shadows moving gently across the walls. He was lighting candles when I found him, the glow of the match flickering across his face. He looked older in that light, or maybe just more exposed. When he saw me, he didn't say anything, neither did I. I sat near him, not too close, not far enough, and then he spoke. "I hate this house when it's quiet." His voice was low, careful. I nodded. "I do too." He lit another candle, then another, little flames flickering between us. "It's not just the quiet," he said. "It's how it feels empty even when people are in it." That hit something deep. I nodded again, slower this time. We sat there, letting that truth hang in the space between us. The rain picked up. He leaned back, legs stretched out, voice softer now. "I think about her a lot. My mom." I looked at him. Something twisted inside my chest. "She loved you," I said. "Yeah," he answered, "but she wasn't happy." His eyes met mine again. "Neither are you." I opened my mouth, closed it. He was right, and hearing it from him stung more than I expected. He looked away. "You ever feel like people look right through you?" I closed my eyes, just for a second, because I didn't need to answer. He already knew. I remember that exact moment, like it's etched into my skin. He reached across the space between us, slow, hesitant. His hand rested on mine, warm and unshaking, but soft like he was afraid I might shatter. I didn't pull away. Every nerve in my body told me I should have, but I stayed, frozen, drawn. His thumb moved across my skin with the gentleness of a man who had been alone too long. We both stared down, not daring to look at each other until we did. And when our eyes met, something unspoken passed between us, something aching, something hungry. We were too close, too aware, and when our lips met, it wasn't urgent, it wasn't wild, it was slow and unsure, like a question we were both too scared to ask, but too desperate not to answer. He pulled back just enough to breathe, to look at me like he needed something I wasn't sure I had to give. Then he said it. "I don't want to be alone anymore." And I let him stay. If you've ever found yourself standing on the fragile edge between right and wrong, then you already know how it goes. The next morning wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was worse. It was quiet. Suffocatingly so. Like the house itself didn't know how to hold the weight of what we'd done. I didn't hear him moving around like usual. No footsteps, no door creaks, nothing. I lingered in my room, pretending to be busy. I refolded clothes that didn't need folding, straightened corners that were already perfect. But my body remembered him. Every breath, every word, every mistake wrapped in warmth that couldn't be undone. Eventually I walked out, heart pounding. His door was shut tight. Locked, maybe. I didn't knock. I couldn't. I floated through that day like a ghost, performing tasks just to avoid the silence screaming in my ears. Around noon, I heard the front door swing open. Mark was home early, his trip cut short by weather or fate or some cruel twist of timing. He smiled, set his suitcase down, and I felt the nausea crawl up from somewhere deep inside. Jake didn't come out of his room, not even when Mark called for him. I said it was stress, school, the storm, lies, stacked on lies. Mark didn't question me, not really. He never did. Dinner that night was hollow, just the two of us. Jake was a ghost upstairs, and I felt like one sitting across from my husband. Mark ate like everything was fine, like we were fine. But I couldn't chew, I couldn't swallow. I was drowning in guilt that didn't scream. It whispered, slow and steady like a heartbeat I couldn't turn off. The days dragged. Jake kept his distance, and I kept mine. We became shadows brushing past each other, pretending nothing had happened. But it had. And it lived in every look we didn't exchange, every word we left unsaid. Then one night, long after the world had gone quiet, I heard him, through his door, crying, not softly, not controllably. It was raw, like something deep inside him was breaking open. I stood outside that door, hand hovering near the handle, heart aching with things I couldn't fix. I whispered, "I'm sorry." I didn't know if he heard me. Part of me hoped he didn't. But then the door flew open. His face, red, wet, furious. His eyes cut into me like I was the enemy. "You said I wasn't alone," he said. And before I could explain, before I could even breathe, he slammed the door shut. That night, sleep didn't come. His words played on loop inside me. You said I wasn't alone. I had meant it. In my own fractured way, I meant every word. But what I gave him wasn't safety. It wasn't comfort. It was confusion. It was damage. And I began to wonder if I had ruined more than I realized. I moved through the house like I wasn't real. Mark never noticed. I washed dishes that weren't dirty, wiped counters that didn't need cleaning. At night, I'd lie next to him and wonder if I should tell him everything, burn it all to the ground with truth. Other nights, I'd imagine leaving without a word. But I didn't do either. I stayed. Paralyzed by fear, by shame. By a silence I had perfected long before any of this began. What kind of person reaches out for affection in the arms of someone already drowning? That question haunted me. I couldn't escape it. It took me back to memories I thought I'd buried, of being a little girl waiting for someone to notice her pain, of a home where love was given like a reward and withheld like punishment. I had learned to survive on quiet, to live behind masks, and Jake, he was never just a boy. He was a reflection of everything I'd hidden, everything I feared becoming. Maybe that's what made it all feel so inevitable. Was it love? I don't know. Maybe it was just two people reaching for warmth in the dark, hoping it would feel like home. One afternoon, with the house empty, I wrote it all down. Every truth I couldn't say out loud. I cried harder than I thought possible. When I was done, I folded the letter, sealed it, and tucked it away in a drawer. I couldn't give it to Mark. I couldn't throw it away either. It was the most honest thing I'd ever written, and I buried it like a secret. That part of my story, the one I keep locked inside, it still echoes through the quiet, on rainy days, on sleepless nights, in the spaces where no one's looking. I wonder sometimes if I should have been stronger, or if strength would have meant walking away before the lines blurred. But when pain and longing twist themselves together, it becomes hard to see where comfort ends and damage begins. Have you ever been there? In that in-between space where you're not sure if you're being seen or just being used? If you've ever reached for someone out of loneliness, made a choice you regret just to feel something, then maybe you know how impossible it is to forgive yourself. But maybe that's the kind of forgiveness we chase the longest. Not from them. From ourselves. Because what happened that night with Jake didn't end in flames. There was no collapse, no storm. Just a shift. Subtle, quiet, irreversible. He never looked at me the same again, and I couldn't bear to look in the mirror. Love isn't always kind. Sometimes it's born from the deepest corners of ache. Sometimes it's just a cry in the dark, hoping someone answers. I don't know if I'll ever confess, or if Jake will ever heal, or if I'll ever feel whole again. But I carry it, every single day. not as a punishment, not as a lesson, but as a bruise that reminds me how easily the heart can mistake hurt for healing. Maybe the hardest truth to accept is this: some of the most painful mistakes are the ones made not out of cruelty, but out of craving. And the path to forgiveness doesn't start with someone else's permission. It begins when we finally face the pieces of ourselves we've been too afraid to name.